The wind off the Bridger Range came cold and merciless that October afternoon, slicing through the thin Wyoming sun like it meant to remind every living soul who was truly in charge. A lone man stood on the Granger Station platform, shoulders squared against the gathering eyes of the valley, one hand buried deep in his coat pocket, fingers wrapped tight around a simple oak ring he'd carved by lonely firelight. 4 bitter winters on that high mountain had hollowed him out. 4 months of careful letters to a woman he'd never met had given him something dangerous hope. The mail-order bride. The wagon appeared at the end of the dusty street, kicking up a thin trail that hung in the air like smoke from a warning fire. The whole town had turned out as small towns do when a man's private loneliness is about to be put on public display. He swallowed hard. The plan was simple. It had to be. Then the wagon stopped. Dust settled. The door opened. And in that single heart-stopping instant, the mountain man understood that some things in this life are a good deal bigger than any plan a man can make. Elias Cord had a plan. It wasn't a complicated plan. It wasn't even a particularly good one. But after 4 winters alone on a mountain in Wyoming, a man stops caring whether his plans are good. He just cares that they exist. The plan was simple. The wagon would arrive at 2:30. He would be standing at the station, clean shirt, combed hair, the ring in his left pocket. She would step down. He would say her name. She would say his. They would shake hands, maybe. Or not. He hadn't decided about the handshake yet. Then they would ride back up the mountain together. That was the whole plan. 4 months of letters. 4 months of careful, deliberate handwriting by lamplight, choosing every word like a man choosing stones to cross a river. One wrong step and you go under. 4 months of a woman named Wren Holt writing back from Montana in script so clean it almost hurt to look at. Telling him things she said she'd never told anyone. About the ranch her father left her. About the silence that came with it. About how silence can be a gift for a while and then slowly, without announcing itself, become something else entirely. He understood that. He understood that better than anything. So he wrote back, and she wrote back, and somewhere in the middle of all that back and forth he started carving the ring. Oak. From the tree that had fallen in the storm 2 winters ago, the one that had taken out the east corner of his fence and cost him 3 days of repair work in freezing mud. He'd kept a piece of it. Didn't know why at the time. He did now. He carved it at night mostly, after the fire died down to coals and the cabin went quiet, and the only sound was the wind finding the gaps in the chinking. He'd hold the wood up to the lantern light and turn it slowly, looking for the shape inside it. That's what his father had taught him. The shape is already there. You're just removing what doesn't belong. 3 months of nights. The ring was smooth now, polished to a warm glow, small and simple and made by his own hands, and he was proud of it, actually. He was proud of it in the quiet way a man allows himself to be proud of something when no one is watching. He put on his good shirt the morning the wagon was due. His good shirt was also his only shirt that didn't have a tear in it, but that was beside the point. He rode down the mountain in the gray pre-dawn, the horse's breath making small clouds in the cold air, and he told himself he was not nervous. He was not nervous. He was a 38-year-old man who had felled timber in blizzards and pulled calves in the dark, and once tracked a wounded elk for 11 miles through knee-deep snow. He was not nervous about a wagon. He was absolutely, completely, catastrophically nervous about the wagon. The town of Granger, Wyoming was not a large town. It had a general store, a church, a livery stable, a post office the size of a generous closet, and approximately 240 people who knew each other's business better than their own. It sat at the base of the Bridger Range like something the mountains had exhaled and forgotten about. Elias tied his horse at the post outside the station and stood in the thin October sunshine and waited. Other people were waiting too. That was the first problem. He hadn't accounted for that. He'd been so focused on the plan ring name handshake ride back up the mountain that he'd forgotten the fundamental truth of small towns. Something happening is never just something happening. Something happening is an event. And an event requires an audience. May Lund was there, which was fine. May was always somewhere. 60 years old, built like a woman who had decided long ago that life was going to have to do better than its worst, with sharp eyes and a mouth that said more in silence than most people said in full sentences. She caught his eye and nodded once. He nodded back. Harlan Pruitt was there too. That was the second problem. Harlan Pruitt was 50 years old and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once been seriously wrong about anything, or so he believed. He owned the largest spread in the valley. He had opinions about everything and the resources to impose them. He was not a cruel man exactly. He was something more frustrating than cruel. He was certain. He was standing with two of his ranch hands, thumbs in his belt, already wearing that expression. The one that said he was simply observing. Just happened to be here, purely coincidental. Elias had known Harlan Pruitt for 11 years, and had never once believed a single coincidence the man presented. He moved away from Harlan without making it obvious he was moving away from Harlan. Found a spot near the edge of the platform, close enough to the track to see clearly, far enough from everyone else to breathe. He put his hand in his pocket, touched the ring. Still there. Obviously still there. It hadn't gone anywhere in the last 30 seconds, but his hand checked anyway because his hand had its own agenda and his brain was losing authority over it rapidly. 2:30 came. The wagon appeared at the end of the main street, kicking up a thin trail of dust in the dry autumn air. Elias watched it come, felt his heartbeat do something complicated. He thought about her last letter. She'd said she wasn't sure what he expected. She said she wanted him to know before she arrived that she was not what most men pictured when they placed those advertisements. She didn't elaborate. He'd read the sentence 4 times, tried to understand what she meant, and ultimately decided it didn't matter. He'd written back and told her that the only thing he was expecting was her, and whatever that meant. He'd meant it when he wrote it. He meant it now. The wagon stopped. Dust settled. And then the door opened, and Wren Holt stepped down. She stepped down like a woman who had been stepping down from things her whole life and had never once required assistance with it. One hand on the side of the wagon, one boot finding the ground with certainty. And then she was standing, and she was tall. Not regular tall, not tall for a woman tall. She was tall the way a doorframe is tall, the way a good fence post is tall. 6'1", maybe more. Her shoulders were broad and straight. Her hands, when she reached back for her bag, were the hands of someone who had worked every single day of her life and never apologized for it. Her hair was dark and pulled back. Her face was a strong face, a face that had thought about things. Elias stood very still. His brain did something it had never done before. It went completely, utterly silent. Not calm, silent. There's a difference. Calm is peaceful. Silent is what happens right before something either very good or very terrible occurs, and your brain can't tell which one yet, so it just stops. Wren Holt stood on the platform of Granger Station and looked around. She looked at the station building. She looked down the main street. She looked at May Lund. She looked at Harlan Pruitt and his ranch hands. She was looking for someone. Scanning the crowd with the focused, methodical attention of a person accustomed to assessing situations quickly. Livestock, probably. He'd learned the same look from years in the field. You scan for what's out of place. She had not looked at Elias yet, which meant she was still looking, which meant she hadn't found. Oh no, he was what she was looking for. And she had looked straight at him and kept looking because she hadn't realized. He stepped forward. "Ma'am." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm Elias Cord." Wren Holt went very still. Not the startled kind of still, the recalibrating kind. The kind where a person receives information that doesn't fit their existing model of a situation and takes a moment to construct a new model before responding. Her eyes, dark brown, direct, giving nothing away, moved over him once. Not unkindly, but thoroughly. "Elias Cord," she repeated. Not a question. Just the name. Just his name in her voice, which was lower than he'd expected and steadier than the situation warranted. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Another pause. He was acutely aware of approximately how many people were watching this. He didn't turn to count. He didn't need to. He could feel it. That particular quality of small-town attention, like standing in sunlight through a magnifying glass. "I thought—" She stopped. "You thought I'd be taller," he said. It came out before he'd decided to say it. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not pity. He'd spent 38 years recognizing pity. And this wasn't it. Something more complicated than pity. Something that might, in a different light, have been close to respect. "I wasn't going to say that," she said. "I know," he said. "I said it first." Another beat of silence. And then just barely, just at the edges, something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, the shape of one, the outline of one. From somewhere behind him, loud enough to carry, "Elias, I don't know if you hired a wife or a school teacher. Either way, she'll keep you in line. Harlan Pruitt, of course." There was a ripple through the small crowd, the particular sound of people trying to decide whether to laugh. Some did. A quiet laugh, the careful kind. Elias did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Wren Holt and watched her register the comment, watched her absorb it. Her jaw tightened for just a moment, a fraction of a second, and then it released. Like she'd heard it before. Like she had a whole filing system for comments like that, and she simply opened the drawer, filed it, and closed it again. "Shall we get your bag?" Elias said. She looked at him a moment longer. "Yes," she said, "let's." The bag was larger than he expected. Of course it was. He moved toward it. Instinctively. He was a man. She was a woman. This was what you did, and she was already lifting it with one hand as if it were empty. Which it was not. Which he could tell from the way the wagon shifted slightly when she pulled it clear of the bed. He stopped. She set the bag on the ground and turned to find him standing there with his hands out and nothing to put in them. "I've got it," she said. Simply, not unkindly, just factually the way you'd tell someone the sky was that particular shade of gray. "I see that," he said. They looked at each other. "The horse is this way," he said. She picked up the bag and followed him. He was extremely aware of walking in front of a woman who was taller than him. He was aware of it in his shoulders somehow, in the particular set of his spine. Years of living on a mountain alone had stripped most self-consciousness from him. You couldn't afford it out there with no one watching. But it came back now in a sudden rush, all of it at once, like water through a broken dam. Small. He felt small. He knew he was small. He had always known he was small. 5'4" on a good day, light-framed, the kind of build that made people assume softness until they saw him work. He'd made his peace with it. Mostly. In the abstract way, a man makes peace with something he can't change the peace that holds perfectly well until the moment you're walking through a crowd in front of a 6'1" woman while Harlan Pruitt watches from the station platform. His horse, a compact gray gelding named Duff, was waiting at the post with the particular expression horses wear when they have been waiting longer than they wanted to. Elias untied him, turned to offer Wren his hand to. She was already up. One fluid motion. Hand on the saddle horn, foot in the stirrup, and she was seated before he'd finished the thought. Duff shifted his weight, surprised by the difference. Then settled. Elias stood on the ground. There was a moment, a brief, crystalline, completely awful moment, where he calculated the logistics of mounting his own horse in front of this woman and realized there was absolutely no version of it that carried any dignity whatsoever. He mounted anyway, because what else do you do? He settled into the saddle in front of her. She shifted back to make room without being asked, which somehow made it both better and worse, and he clicked his tongue and Duff moved forward and they rode out of Granger in silence while what felt like the entire population of the valley watched them go. The mountain took over quickly. That was the thing about where Elias lived. 15 minutes out of Granger and the town disappeared. The road narrowed to a track. Aspen and pine closed in on either side. The air changed thinner, colder, carrying the particular scent of high altitude and coming winter. The sky widened. Everything widened. The world got bigger and quieter all at once. He felt Wren shift slightly behind him, adjusting to the terrain. "You've been here before," he said. "High country like this." "All my life," she said. "Montana." "Yes." "What part?" "Northern, below the Beartooths mostly." A pause. "The ranch my father left me was at about 7,000 feet. He nodded. Processed that. 7,000 feet was serious country. Not scenic drive on a Sunday country. Work country. Everything is harder and the weather will kill you country. "You ran it alone," he said. It wasn't quite a question. He'd known it from her letters, but he wanted to hear it said aloud here with the mountains around them. "For 8 years," she said. He thought about that for a while. 8 years alone at 7,000 feet. Cattle and fences and hay and weather and all of it alone. The specific weight of it. "Why did you sell?" he asked. The silence that followed was long enough that he wondered if he'd stepped wrong. But she answered. "Because I could keep the land," she said slowly, choosing words with the same care he used when he wrote letters, "or I could let the land keep me. There's a difference. I decided I didn't want to be kept." He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say to that. Because he understood it exactly. Because he had thought something almost identical about his own mountain in his own way in the long quiet of those 4 winters. They rode the rest of the way up without talking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That surprised him more than anything else so far. The cabin was what it was. He knew how it looked. He'd been living in it for 6 years, the first 2 with his wife Clara, the last 4 alone, and seeing it fresh was hard. But he tried. Standing in the doorway watching Wren see it for the first time. The single main room. The stone fireplace he'd built himself the first winter, imperfect and solid. The narrow windows that let in enough light to work by. The shelves along the east wall crowded with the accumulation of a solitary life books, tools, jars of things, and his carvings. Everywhere his carvings. Wren had to duck to come through the door. She did it without comment, as if she'd been ducking through doors her entire life, which he supposed she had. She stood in the center of the room and looked. He stood near the door and watched her look. He had cleaned the place, thoroughly. In a way he hadn't cleaned it since Clara. Scrubbed the floor, beat the rugs outside, stacked the firewood in neat lines. Arranged things. He'd been embarrassed by how much time he'd spent on it. Still was. She moved first toward the fireplace, looked at the construction of it. He could see her evaluating the mortar, the set of the stones. A person who'd built things herself. Then she turned to the shelves, and she stopped. One of his carvings was there. A hawk, mid-dive wings swept back made from a piece of burl maple that had the most extraordinary grain he'd ever seen. He'd spent 4 months on it. He'd almost burned it twice when it wasn't going right. Wren picked it up, gently. With those large, calloused hands that had spent a decade managing ranch cattle, she picked up the hawk and turned it slowly in the fading afternoon light from the window, looking at each angle, feeling the surface with her thumb following the grain. Elias stood very still. He didn't know why it mattered so much. What she thought of a piece of wood. What one person thought of a thing he'd made alone in a cabin over 4 months. It shouldn't matter. It mattered completely. "You made this," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," he said. She turned it again, once more, then set it back on the shelf with the same care she'd used to pick it up. She looked at him, and for the first time since the wagon stopped, he saw something in her face that wasn't assessment or adjustment or careful neutrality. Something quieter. Something that arrived slowly and stayed. "How long have you been carving?" she asked. "Since I was a boy," he said. "My father taught me." A pause. "My wife used to say I talk to the wood more than I talk to people." He hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out of him like something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment and had misjudged this one. But Wren didn't look away, didn't look down, didn't perform the particular social delicacy people usually performed when he mentioned Clara. "She wasn't wrong," Wren said. He almost laughed. He didn't, but almost. "No," he said, "she wasn't." He made supper. Venison stew biscuits, dried apple preserves from May Lund's cellar. Simple food made well, that was the one domestic thing he'd mastered in 4 years of living alone. You cook for yourself long enough, you either get good at it or you stop caring. He'd chosen to get good at it. Wren ate the way people eat when they have genuinely been hungry, not ravenous, not theatrical, but steadily with focus. Like eating was work and she was going to do it properly. She ate everything. He noticed that. They sat at the small table by the window, and the candle between them threw soft moving light across both their faces, and outside the mountains were going dark against a sky that was still faintly amber at the edges. The silence was different in here. Smaller, closer, more negotiable. "Your letters," Wren said finally, "were more careful than I expected." He looked at her. "Careful. You chose every word." She set down her spoon. "I could tell. Most men who place those advertisements, they write the same letter. Same words. Strong, hard-working, good land looking for a companion. Like a list of goods for sale." She paused. "You wrote about the view from your porch at first light. You wrote about what you missed about having someone to talk to. You wrote about the wood." Her eyes held his steadily. "Men don't usually admit what they miss." He was quiet for a moment. "It seemed dishonest not to," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." He thought about asking her something. About Montana, maybe. About the 8 years alone. About what she missed. About the letter she'd written where she described standing at her kitchen window watching the snow come down and feeling she'd used the exact word remote, not lonely, remote, and how different those two things were. He didn't ask. "Not yet. Some questions are for later. When you've earned the right to the answer." After supper, he showed her where she would sleep. He'd made up the cot in the back corner, moved his own things to the other side, set out an extra blanket from the chest. She looked at the arrangement without expression. "The roof leaks over the far end when the wind comes from the north," he said. "It's not on the list yet, but it's high on the list." "Which way is north?" she asked. He pointed. She moved the cot 3 feet to the left. He watched. "Better," she said. He nodded. "Good night, Mr. Cord," she said. "Elias," he said. A pause. "Good night, Elias," she said. He went to his side of the cabin and lay on his bedroll and stared at the ceiling and listened to the mountain wind working its way around the corners and thought about 100 different things, and none of them clearly. She was not what he'd expected. He hadn't expected the hawk. He hadn't expected the cot. He hadn't expected remote said aloud in a voice that meant the person knew what the word actually cost. He lay there in the dark for a long time. Not sleeping. Not exactly thinking either. Just adjusting. The way you adjust to a new altitude. Slowly. One breath at a time. He was up before dawn. Always was. The mountain didn't wait for you to feel ready. The animals needed feeding, the water needed checking. The day had its demands, and they started at first light, whether you were prepared for them or not. He built the fire quietly, dressed in the dark, pulled on his boots and his coat and slipped out the door into the cold blue pre-dawn without waking her. The sky to the east was barely lighter than the mountains, just a thinning of the dark, stars still out overhead. He crossed to the barn, fed the horse, checked the cattle pen, 6 head all present, all settled. Checked the fence line on the east side where one post had been leaning. Everything fine, he breathed. It was one of those mornings that Wyoming produces occasionally, as if apologizing for its winters cold and still and unbearably clear. The kind of morning where you can see every spine on the Bridger Range and the air tastes like something that hasn't been breathed yet. He stood at the fence and looked at it and let himself feel for just a moment that maybe the plan wasn't ruined. That maybe different from expected wasn't the same as wrong. That maybe the sound came from the south pasture, a crash, wood splintering. Then the low resonant bellow of something very large and very angry. He was running before he finished the thought. Bull was out. He'd named the animal Bull because he'd gotten him as a calf and had intended to come up with a better name later, and then never had. And now the animal was 4 years old and weighed somewhere near 1,800 pounds and had the temperament of a storm front and was currently not in his pen, not anywhere near his pen. He was standing in May Lund's kitchen garden. May Lund, whose property began at the creek 50 yards to the south, whose kitchen garden was the product of 20 years of careful tending, whose prize roses along the south fence had survived 3 harsh Wyoming winters through what could only be described as sheer force of May Lund's will. We're not going to survive this. Bull had already been through the main vegetable beds. There were boot-sized hoof prints in what had been 12 minutes ago May's winter squash. He was standing in the middle of the rose bed, now swinging his enormous head, and every time he swung it, another section of carefully tended fence went sideways. May was on her porch. "Elias Cord," she said in a voice that was extraordinarily calm for a woman watching 1,800 pounds of beef destroy something she loved. "May," he said. "Fix it," she said. "That's all I want, just fix it." He had his rope. He always had his rope. He'd coiled it in his hands while running, and now he stood at the edge of May's garden and looked at Bull and tried to remember everything he knew about handling an animal in this state, which was don't approach from the front. Don't make sudden movements. Talk low. Move slow. He also knew that Bull had charged him twice before on his best days. And this was not Bull's best day. He was working out the geometry of the approach when he heard footsteps behind him. Long strides, covering ground fast. He didn't turn. He knew before he turned. Wren Holt came to a stop beside him. She had her coat on. She'd grabbed her coat before coming out, which meant she'd woken up, assessed the situation, dressed appropriately, and arrived in less time than it had taken him to get his rope situated. She was not holding anything. No rope, no stick, nothing. She looked at Bull. "How long has he been out?" she asked. Like they were discussing something manageable, like weather. 10 minutes, maybe less. "Has he charged yet?" "No, he's worked up, but he hasn't committed to anything." She nodded once. "Stay here," she said, and she walked into May Lund's garden. "Wren." She didn't look back. He went to say her name again, and his voice stopped itself, because something about the way she was moving made his voice understand, even if his brain hadn't caught up yet, that interrupting her right now would be the wrong thing. She walked toward the animal slowly. Not the slow of fear, the slow of intention. Each step placed deliberately, weight transferred carefully, no sudden shifts. Bull's head came around. The animal's nostrils flared. His eyes showed white at the edges. The pawing started, the preliminary pawing that Elias knew was the beginning of something much worse. Wren kept walking. She started talking, low, continuous. Elias could only catch fragments from where he stood, just sound, really. The rhythm of it. Not commands, not the sharp correction tone people use with livestock when they want to establish authority. Something different. Something that moved like water. Like she was describing something distant and calm. "Easy, easy now, you're all right. Nobody's going to hurt you. You're all right." Bull's ear twitched forward. Just the one ear, just a fraction. But Elias noticed. The pawing slowed. Wren stopped moving. 10 feet away. She stayed still, just her voice continuing constant and unhurried, and she extended her hand palm up in the direction of the animal. May Lund had come off her porch. She was standing at the garden gate, one hand on the post, not breathing. Elias could tell even from 15 feet, he could tell she wasn't breathing. He wasn't either. The morning was completely silent except for Wren's voice. Bull lowered his head, not in aggression the other direction, and took one step toward her, then stopped, then another step, and then Wren's hand was on his neck, just there. her large, steady hand on the animal's massive neck just behind the left ear working in slow circles. And the sound that came out of Bull's chest was not bellowing, and it was not threat. It was something that had no business coming from an 1,800-pound animal. Something almost like relief. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Wren turned her head slowly, found Elias's eyes across the garden. "Rope," she said. He handed May the coil without thinking. May took it automatically, also without thinking, and then he realized he'd walked forward without noticing that he was standing 5 feet from Bull, that the animal had not reacted to his approach because he'd come in behind Wren's presence the way you move behind cover. He gave Wren the rope directly. She fashioned the halter without looking at it. Her hands knew the shape already. The loop, the cross, the adjustment, 30 seconds, and it was done, and she was walking back through May's garden with Bull following behind her like something that had never charged anything in its life. The assembled crowd, it had become a crowd. There were 6-8 people at May's fence now, ranch hands from Harlan Pruitt's property, 2 women from the road, the Halverson boy 16 who had apparently run out to watch. They parted for Wren and Bull to pass through, not performing it, just doing it. The automatic response of people in the presence of something that cannot be argued with. Wren led Bull back to the pen, backed him in, secured the gate. The broken hinge was the issue it had given at the base, and the whole structure had swung enough for Bull to push through. She examined it with a brief, competent attention. Then she looked at Elias. "Your south post has been working loose," she said. "The hinge gave at the base. I can see where it's been rubbing." A pause. "We should reset it before tonight, or he'll find it again." He looked at her. She looked back. Behind them at the fence line, Harlan Pruitt's voice carried across the morning. "Well," Harlan said, "I'll say this. A man who can pick a partner like that knows something the rest of us don't." He paused, deliberate. "Even if the rest of us can't figure out what it is yet." A few people laughed, not the cruel kind this time. Something more uncertain. Like people who had just seen something they hadn't expected and weren't sure what category to put it in. Wren did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the fence post, on the broken hinge, on the work that needed doing. Her jaw did that thing it had done at the station, the fraction of a second tightening. The closing of a drawer. Elias stood beside her. He was aware of a complicated feeling in his chest. Something that had several components he didn't entirely want to look at directly. Pride, which surprised him. Not his own pride, hers, just genuine, uncomplicated pride in what he'd just watched. And underneath it, quieter, less comfortable, the other thing. The thing that sounded like she did what you couldn't. Which was true. And he didn't know yet what to do with true. He looked at the broken hinge. He looked at the mountain rising behind his property, the aspens already turning at the higher elevations, the sky a hard October blue. He looked at Wren Holt standing in his pasture in her coat, already calculating what the repair required, already working. He pulled his hand out of his pocket. "I've got wire in the barn," he said, "and a spare hinge fitting. Should take about an hour." Wren looked at him. Something in her expression that he couldn't name yet. He was still learning the language of her face, and there were a lot of words in it. "All right," she said, and they went to get the wire. Behind them at the fence, Elias was aware of Harlan Pruitt still watching. He was aware of May Lund watching too, but differently, with those sharp, warm, knowing eyes that had seen about 40 more years of Wyoming than Elias had. He didn't turn back. He walked beside Wren toward the barn, matching his stride to hers as best he could, the mountain morning spreading out around them, enormous and clear and cold. He was not part of anyone's plan right now. Neither was she, which meant possibly this was where the real thing began. The fence got fixed. That part was simple. New hinge. Reset post. Packed the base with gravel and tamped it solid. Bull stood in his pen and watched them work with the expression of an animal who had already forgotten the entire morning and was thinking about lunch. Elias handed Wren tools when she needed them. She asked for them before he'd finished deciding whether to offer. They worked in a rhythm that didn't need explaining, the kind of rhythm that either exists between two people or it doesn't. You can't manufacture it. It existed. That was the problem, not the rhythm itself. The rhythm was fine. The rhythm was the best part of the day. The problem was what came after the rhythm. What came after was Harlan Pruitt's voice still sitting in his chest like a stone he couldn't cough up. What came after was the particular mathematics of what had happened that morning, who had walked into May's garden and who had stood at the fence with his rope in his hands. He knew what he'd seen. He also knew what everyone else had seen, and those two things were the same thing, which made it worse. The days settled into shape after that. Not comfortably, not yet. But they settled. Wren woke early. So did he. They moved around the cabin in the dark before dawn with the careful awareness of two people learning the geography of each other where the other person stood to pull on their boots, which side of the wash basin they preferred, how much space to leave when passing through the doorway. She took her coffee black. He took his with sugar, which he'd always been faintly embarrassed about and now was extremely embarrassed about, though she said nothing. She said nothing about a lot of things. That was one of her qualities. She observed, she filed, she did not editorialize. It should have been restful living alongside that quality. And it was mostly. Except when it wasn't. Except when the silence felt less like peace and more like patience. Like she was waiting for him to catch up to something. He didn't know what he was supposed to be catching up to. After the fence was fixed, she started helping with the cattle. He didn't ask her to. She just appeared. In the mornings when he went to check the herd, she was there, beside him, assessing. She knew cattle the way a musician knows scales, not from thinking about it, but from the long repetition of doing it until the knowledge lived in the hands. She could look at one of his animals from 50 feet and tell him things he hadn't noticed. That one's off her feed. That one's favoring the left rear. That one's in early labor, she'll go tonight, you should check her at 2. She was right about the one in labor. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. They pulled the calf together in the cold barn at 3 in the morning, the lantern throwing orange light across the straw, and when it was done, calf on its feet, Mother settled both of them. Fine. Wren sat back on her heels and looked at the animal with an expression that had nothing performed about it. Pure satisfaction, simple and clean. He recognized it. The specific satisfaction of something living that almost didn't. Good, she said quietly. Just that, good. He nodded. They walked back to the cabin in the dark and he made coffee and they sat on opposite sides of the table and said almost nothing. And it was one of the most comfortable 30 minutes he'd spent in 4 years. Which scared him more than he wanted to admit. May Lund came on a Thursday. She arrived with 2 jars of preserved peaches and the focused expression of someone who was not primarily there for the preserved peaches. Elias was splitting wood near the barn. He saw her come up the track and felt the particular combination of warmth and wariness that May had always produced in him. She was the closest thing to family he had left in this valley, and family could see things you were trying to keep in the dark. "Where's your girl?" May said. "She's not my girl," Elias said. "Where is she?" "Checking the north fence line." May looked in the direction of the north fence line. Then she looked at Elias. Then at the woodpile, which was significantly larger than it had been last week. "Who split all that?" she said. "We both did." "Uh-huh." May set the peaches on the fence post. "And how are things, Elias?" "Fine." "How are things really?" He set the axe down. Because May Lund had known him since he was 26 years old and there was no point performing composure at her. She had a built-in detector for performed composure and it made a sound he could practically hear. "It's complicated," he said. "Most worthwhile things are." "May, I'm not pushing." She picked up one of the peach jars, turned it in her hands. "I'm just noting that you've been splitting wood for 2 hours on a morning that doesn't require 2 hours of wood splitting. And I know what that means. It means you're thinking hard and moving your arms so you don't have to admit it." He looked at the woodpile. She was not wrong. "She's capable," he said finally. "More capable than most. More than me in some things, a lot of things. And that bothers you." "It bothers other people," he said. "Which bothers me. Which—" He stopped, picked up the axe again, put it down. Harlan was watching that morning. "You know what he's been saying around the valley." "I've heard," she said. "He thinks she deserves better." "And what do you think?" May said. Emphasis on the you. Elias was quiet. Because what he actually thought underneath the woodpile in the early mornings and the careful distance he'd been maintaining was something he hadn't let himself look at directly yet. He thought that Wren Holt was remarkable. He thought she was possibly the most capable person he had shared a morning with in his adult life. He thought that somewhere in the last week he had started waking up not with dread about what the day would require, but with something lighter. Something that took him a moment to identify because it had been so long. He thought all of this, and right alongside all of this, like a shadow attached to something moving, he thought she is going to wake up one morning and understand what she has chosen and find it lacking. Not today. Maybe not this month. But eventually. And eventually was a thing he could not fix with wire and a new hinge fitting. He didn't say any of this to May. He said, "I'm managing." May picked up her jars. "You're running," she said. Not unkind, just exact. "You leave before she wakes up, and you come back when there's supper to make so you have something to do with your hands. You are running away from a woman who is standing still in your house waiting for you to stop." She turned toward the track. "The peaches are for her. Tell her I said welcome." She walked away. He stood at the woodpile, the axe in his hands. The north fence line visible in the distance, and somewhere along it Wren Holt checking posts. He split 3 more logs. Then he put the axe away. She found the notebook on a Wednesday. He knew the exact moment because he came into the cabin for the midday meal, and something in the quality of the silence was different. Not bad, not accusatory, just changed. The way the air in a room changes when someone has just put something down that they were holding. Wren was at the table, her hands folded in front of her, her face arranged in the careful, neutral expression she used when she was thinking hard about something and had decided not to show it. The notebook was on the shelf, exactly where he'd left it, exactly where it had been for 4 years. He knew that without checking, because he knew the shelf the way he knew every surface in the cabin. He stood in the doorway. She looked at him. "I wasn't looking for it," she said. "I know," he said. "I was looking for the survey map. You said it was on the east shelf." "It is. It's behind the—" He stopped. "It's fine, Wren." She held his gaze. "Did you ever read the last part? The end of it?" He understood what she was asking. "Not in a long time," he said. She nodded slowly. "She wrote about your hands," Wren said, quiet, level, giving him the information like something she'd found that belonged to him and was returning carefully. "She said you talked to the wood, but your hands listened." He didn't say anything. "She was right," Wren said. He crossed the room, got the survey map from behind the notebook without looking at the notebook, set it on the table. "We should check the property line at the creek," he said, "before the weather turns." A pause. "Yes," she said. "All right." And that was all. No ceremony, no performance. She'd found it. She'd told him. She'd given it back. All of it, the finding, the telling, the giving back done with the same steady hands that had set the hawk back on the shelf that first evening, with the same quality of care that goes into returning something to exactly where it was. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. Harlan Pruitt made his move on a market day, the last Friday of October. Granger's weekly gather, not much of one by most standards, but enough. People trading, talking, settling accounts. Elias had gone to pick up feed and a new saw blade. Wren had come because she needed thread, and because May had asked her to collect a book she'd ordered from the supply wagon. They separated at the livery, agreed to meet at the wagon in an hour. He was at the hardware table when he heard it. Not loud. Harlan Pruitt never needed to be loud. He had the kind of voice that carried without raising the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Miss Holt." Elias turned slowly, kept his hands on the saw blade he was examining. Harlan was standing near the dry goods, hat in hand. The hat in hand was a performance of manners he'd learned to recognize it, talking to Wren with the particular careful warmth of a man who has decided he is doing someone a favor. "I just want to say," Harlan was saying, "that I hope you're settling in well. The mountain's a hard life, particularly for someone accustomed to a pause, chosen, larger operations." Wren said something Elias couldn't hear. Harlan nodded as if she'd agreed with him. "That's what I mean, though. A woman of your capabilities, your experience. It seems a shame to—" Another pause. The art was in the pauses. "Well, there are other situations in the valley that might suit better. That's all I'll say." Silence. Then Wren's voice, clear enough this time. "I had larger. That's not what I needed." Harlan smiled the smile of a man who has decided the other person hasn't understood him. Of course. I only mean—" "I know what you mean," Wren said. Not sharp, not angry. Final. The way you close a door. Firmly. Not slamming it, just closed. Harlan Pruitt stood with his hat in his hands, and the conversation had ended, and he didn't entirely know how it had ended, but it had. Elias put down the saw blade. He walked to the wagon and waited. Wren arrived 7 minutes later with May's book and a spool of dark thread and set both in the wagon bed without commentary. They rode out of Granger. A mile up the mountain track, Elias said, "You don't have to tell me what he said." "I know," she said. "Another mile." "He thinks you deserve better," Elias said. Flat, not a question. Wren was quiet for a moment. "He thinks he knows what better means," she said. "He doesn't." "And you do," Elias said. Not a challenge, a genuine question. She turned to look at him. Full on. The way she looked at the hawk. The way she'd read the last page of the notebook without taking anything that wasn't offered. "I know what I had," she said. 8 years of large, of more than enough land and more than enough livestock and more than enough work. And I would go to bed every night in a house that had plenty of everything, and I would lie there and feel—" She paused, chose the word the same way he chose words in letters. Remote. He looked at the track ahead. "My wife used that word," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "You wrote it in a letter. You said she used it and you didn't understand it until after." He had written that. He'd forgotten he'd written it. The intimacy of being known through words you'd sent months ago, it was a strange sensation, like being seen from a direction you hadn't anticipated. "I understand it now," he said. "Yes," she said, "so do I." The mountains moved past them on either side. The aspens were almost bare now, the last gold leaves clinging. The sky had the particular hard blue of late October, the color that meant winter was forming somewhere above it, building patient, waiting for its moment. Neither of them said anything else until the cabin. That night he started avoiding her properly. He didn't plan it. It happened the way those things happen, incrementally, gradually. One decision that isn't quite a decision. He came to bed after she was asleep. He left before she woke. He found reasons to be outside. The barn roof needed checking. The creek needed checking. Everything always needed checking. 3 days of it. 4. He told himself it was normal. 2 people adjusting, needing their own air. That was healthy. That was not running. May had called it running, and May was not wrong about most things, but she was wrong about this. He was just taking space. He was absolutely completely running. He knew it by the 5th day because Duff knew it. The horse had started giving him a look, a specific look. The look of an animal who has been ridden in the same anxious circles often enough to recognize the pattern. He tied Duff up at the fence and told the horse to keep his opinions to himself. Duff did not look persuaded. The storm came on a Sunday night. It didn't announce itself dramatically. Those were the dangerous ones in Elias's experience, the storms that didn't posture, that didn't build with visible menace over the mountains. The ones that just arrived. Gray ceiling dropping. Temperature diving. Wind picking up from the north with the patient intensity of something that had been traveling a very long distance. He got the animals in by mid-afternoon, got extra wood to the porch, checked the barn roof, which actually did need checking. He hadn't been entirely lying to himself about that. By 4 o'clock the snow was coming sideways, and the track down the mountain had ceased to exist as a track and was now just an idea buried under 6 inches of new powder. They were in for the duration. He stood on the porch and looked at the whitening world for a moment. Then he went inside. Wren was at the table with the survey map spread out, weighting the corners with whatever was available. A jar, a boot, a piece of ironwork. She was making notes in the margin in her careful, compact handwriting. She looked up. 3 days, she said, maybe 4. How do you know? The pressure dropped this morning, I should have told you. A pause. The clouds were stacking up behind the Beartooths last night. I could see it from the north window. He looked at the survey map. At the notes she was making. At the 4 years of living on this mountain that he apparently had not spent learning to read the sky the way she had. You could have told me this morning, he said. You left before I was up, she said. Not an accusation, not quite. He looked at the window, white outside, just white. I'll get more firewood, he said. The first night was practical. They had enough wood. They had enough food. He made stew. She checked the animals through the barn door that connected to the cabin he'd built to pass through himself, and she'd noted it the first day and said it was smart, and he'd felt more pleased about that than he'd admitted. They ate. They banked the fire. They slept. The second day was longer. There was only so much practical work available in a cabin during a blizzard. He found some. She found some. They moved around each other with the same careful geography as always, except now the geography was smaller. Much smaller. The storm had compressed the world to these walls. There was no barn to disappear to, no fence line to check, no excuse that the weather wouldn't immediately disprove. He ran out of excuses by midday. She didn't say anything about it. He sat by the fire and worked on a piece of wood. A rough one, he'd been meaning to start it for weeks. He hadn't decided what it was going to be yet, which was fine. You didn't always have to know. Sometimes you just started removing what didn't belong and the shape told you eventually. Wren pulled a chair up across from him. He looked up. She was holding her hands out, watching what he was doing. Show me, she said. He looked at her. You said you'd teach me, she said. The night you made coffee after the calf. You didn't actually say it, but you were going to. She held his gaze. Show me. He was going to say something about that, about how he hadn't said anything technically, but then he thought about the 4 nights he'd come in late and the 5 mornings he'd left early, and he decided to put the argument down. He handed her the wood and the chisel. Not that end, he said. Turn it. She turned it. Feel for the grain, he said. Run your thumb along it. She did. You feel where it wants to go. A pause. Her thumb moving slowly. Yes, she said. That's the direction. You don't fight the grain. You follow it or you go across it depending on what you need, but you don't fight it. She looked at the wood, then at the chisel, then back at the wood. What do I take off? Whatever isn't the shape, he said. She looked at him. That's not an answer, she said. "It's the only answer there is," he said. "You have to decide what the shape is, then take off everything that isn't it." She turned the wood in her hands, quiet for a long moment. "What's yours going to be?" she asked. He looked at his own piece, the one he'd been avoiding starting because he hadn't been able to answer that question. "I don't know yet," he said. She nodded, like that was a reasonable answer, like not knowing yet was a valid place to be. They worked in silence. The fire moved. The storm moved outside. The cabin creaked once settling against the wind. She was surprisingly good at it. Not expert, not yet, not close, but she had the patience for it and the hands for it, and she didn't force. She asked questions when she needed to, and didn't ask questions she didn't need to, and she wasn't embarrassed about the asking. He found himself talking about the grain of different woods, about maple versus oak versus pine, about what his father had told him that a good carver wasn't someone with perfect technique, but someone with good ears, because the wood told you things if you listened. She asked what pine sounded like. He said it was direct, uncomplicated, got to the point. She asked what oak sounded like. He thought about that. "Stubborn," he said. "Has opinions. Takes longer to get anywhere, but what you end up with is solid." She looked at her piece of wood, which was oak. "Well," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The second night. They'd eaten late. The fire was lower now, the kind of amber low that meant the big log had caught and would hold through the night. Wren was at the window looking at nothing, just white and dark. Elias was at the table. He didn't plan what he said next. It came out the way things came out at this hour in this kind of firelight, the way things came out when all the practical reasons to stay quiet had been used up. "I'm afraid," he said. She turned from the window. He was looking at the table, at the piece of wood. "Of what?" she said. "That you'll wake up one morning." He paused. "And look around, and do the math." She was quiet. "The math," she said. "What you could have. What you have." He looked up. "I'm not unaware of what I am. What I'm not. What most people see when they look." He set down the wood. What Harlan sees. The fire moved. Outside the wind changed pitch, higher, then settled. Wren walked from the window to the chair across from him. She sat down. She did not look away, and she did not look at him the way people looked at you when they were about to be kind about something difficult. She just looked at him. "Do you know why I answered your advertisement?" she said. "You told me, because I didn't describe myself." "That's part of it." She folded her hands on the table. "The other part is what you did describe. You wrote about the view from your porch at first light. You wrote about missing someone to talk to. You wrote—" She paused. "You wrote that you believed two people could make each other stronger without either one making the other feel smaller." She held his gaze. "I read that sentence 4 times. He remembered writing it. He'd felt foolish writing it. He'd almost crossed it out. "That's what you were trying to say," she continued. "Not a list of what you had, what you believed." A pause. "I have met very few men willing to write down what they believe." Her voice was level, steady as it always was. But there was something in it now, something he hadn't heard before. Not softness exactly, more like permission. Permission to hear the thing she was actually saying underneath the words. "I did not come to this mountain because I was out of options. I came because of that sentence." Silence. The log shifted in the fire, a small collapse of coals. 8 years, Wren said. "I ran that ranch for 8 years. Every fence, every head of cattle, every hard decision. And I was good at it. I know I was good at it." A pause. "And every person who knew me spent those 8 years looking at me like I was a problem they couldn't solve. Like my competence was a challenge someone needed to answer." She looked at her hands. "I did not want someone to answer it. I wanted someone to just—" She stopped. "Stop looking at it," he said. She looked up. "Yes," she said. He thought about the morning with Bull, about standing at the fence, about the rope in his hands, about the complicated feeling in his chest afterward that he'd been splitting wood around for a week. He thought about what he'd actually felt underneath the complicated part when she walked out of May's garden with 1,800 pounds of problem following behind her. It had not been shame. It had been, he hadn't let himself name it, but here in this firelight at this hour with the storm outside and no more excuses, it had been awe, simple, uncomplicated awe. And then immediately over the top of it, like a hand over a flame, the fear. The old practiced familiar fear of a man who has spent 38 years in a body that the world has told him is not quite enough. The reflex, the flinch, the quick covering of the thing before anyone else could see it. "I left early," he said. "Every morning this week. He stopped. "I was running," she said. He looked at her. "May told me," she said, simply. "She came by Tuesday. She said to tell you she said it first." He almost laughed. He did laugh. Briefly, quietly, just the shape of a laugh in his chest. "She's not wrong," he said. "She usually isn't," Ren said. "In my experience. 4 days." He looked at her. "Were you—" He didn't quite know how to finish it. "I was," she said. He nodded, slow. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Then stop," she said. "Not unkind, not complicated. Just stop. Present tense, starting now." He picked up the piece of wood again, turned it in his hands. The grain ran diagonally, interesting that. He hadn't noticed it in the daylight. "My father taught me this," he said, quietly, not quite changing the subject. "Sitting by the fire at night. He'd carve and I'd watch, and eventually he'd give me a piece and I'd try." He turned the wood. "He said the thing about working with wood, the thing you had to understand was that you weren't in charge. You were in conversation." He looked up. Ren was watching him. "Not in charge," he said again. "In conversation." She looked at the piece of oak in her own hands. "I can do conversation," she said. He looked at her. And something that had been held under pressure in his chest for 5 days, since the morning with Bull, since Harlan's voice at the fence, since his own relentless early morning, shifted. Slightly. Just slightly. Not resolved, not fixed, just moved. Enough to breathe around. "Yes," he said, "I know." The 3rd day she taught him to read the sky. Not all of it. You couldn't learn all of it in a day. But she took him through what she knew how to look at the way clouds stacked against a peak and what that meant about pressure. How the color of the western light in the late afternoon told you something about the next morning. How the wind direction and the temperature dropped together created a pattern you could learn to recognize. She stood at the north window and explained. He stood beside her and listened. The storm was easing by mid-afternoon, just perceptibly. The snow lighter, the wind less. "Tomorrow," she said. "By tomorrow afternoon the track will be passable." He looked at the sky, tried to see what she saw. "There," she said. She put her hand up beside his face, pointing. "The way it's thinning in the northwest. See that lighter band?" He looked. "Yes," he said. "That's the edge of it, the edge moving east." He watched the lighter band. She lowered her hand. They stood at the window for a moment, side by side, just looking. "My father taught me this," she said. "He said if you pay attention to the sky long enough it starts to feel like a conversation." Elias turned to look at her. She was still looking at the sky, profile strong and clear against the window light. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. He looked back at the sky. Outside, the storm was thinning at its northwest edge. The mountains were coming back into view, just barely. Just the highest ridgelines first dark against the clearing sky. Inside, the fire held, and somewhere in the silence between two people sitting at a window watching a storm end, something that had been running stopped, just stopped, and stood still. The storm left the way it arrived, quietly, without ceremony. One morning the sky was white and pressing, and the next it was hard blue, and the track down the mountain was passable again, and the world had returned to its normal dimensions. Except it hadn't, not entirely. Something had shifted in those 3 days, nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and name cleanly. But it was there. The way the air in a room is different after a window has been opened and closed again, technically the same room. Not quite the same air. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. They just moved through the days with slightly less distance between them. Slightly more ease. He stopped leaving before she woke. She started leaving a cup of coffee ready for him, black his preference, she'd been watching before he even got to the pot. Small things. The vocabulary of two people deciding without announcing it to be in the same place at the same time. It should have been simple. It almost was. Except Harlan Pruitt. He started hearing things at the end of October. Not directly. Never directly with Harlan. It was always the sideways version. The comment at the feed store that someone repeated to someone else who mentioned it to May, who told Elias with the careful precision of someone delivering information they'd rather not deliver but believed he needed to have. Harlan had been talking, not loudly, not publicly, in the patient, methodical way of a man who understood that opinion applied consistently and over time had the same erosive effect as water on stone. He'd said things to the pastor, to the men at the livery, to 2 families at the eastern end of the valley who had daughters they were hoping someone in the area might consider. He said the arrangement was irregular. He said a woman of that capability living with a man of limited resources was a situation worth watching. He said he only raised it because he cared about the community. He always said that last part. He probably even believed it. Elias heard all of this secondhand and said nothing. Filed it, went home, worked the fence line, worked the barn, made supper. Ren didn't ask what he was thinking about. But she looked at him sometimes across the table, across the fire, with an expression that meant she already knew and was deciding whether to say so. She was giving him time to get there himself. That was something else he was learning about her. She had patience in her the way the mountains had patience, not passive, not indifferent, but the long geological kind. The kind that understood some things, took as long as they took. He got there on a Thursday. May came at mid-morning with the particular purposeful stride of someone who has decided something needs to happen today. Elias was at the barn. Wren was checking the south fence where one post had been leaning since before the storm. May walked straight to Elias, no preamble. "Harlan's called a gathering," she said. Elias set down the fence staple he was holding. "What kind of gathering?" "The neighborly kind." Her voice was dry as October grass. "The kind where neighbors gather and talk about community and what's good for the valley and happen to land on the subject of irregular arrangements between people who don't fit the expected pattern." He looked at her. "When?" he said. "Saturday evening, at the Halverson place." She paused. "He didn't invite you?" "No." "He didn't invite Wren either." "No," Elias said. "He wouldn't." May looked at him steadily. "What are you going to do?" He thought about the woodpile, about the axe, about how long he'd been working around things that needed to be walked toward instead. "I'm going to go," he said. May nodded. Once, satisfied. "I figured," she said. "I'll be there too." He told Wren that evening. They were on the porch after supper. The 1st of November, cold enough that both of them had their coats. The sky was fully dark by 5 now. Stars beginning. "Harlan's called a gathering Saturday," he said, "to talk about us." Wren looked at the dark valley below. "I heard," she said. Of course she'd heard. She had ears, and May had a reach that extended considerably further than her property line. "I'm going," he said. She was quiet a moment. "I'm going too," she said. "Wren." "It involves me," she said. "I go." He looked at her profile, strong and clear in the darkness. The set of her jaw that meant the decision had been made and there was no point in the conversation that followed. "All right," he said. They sat in the cold and looked at the stars coming out over the Bridger Range. "What are you going to say?" she asked. He thought about it. "The truth," he said. "I'm going to say the truth." She looked at him. "That's all?" she said. "That's all I've got," he said. She looked back at the sky. "It's enough," she said, quiet, like she meant it completely. The Halverson place was the largest in the valley. Wide front room, log walls. 8 years of harvest suppers had seasoned it into a particular warmth. Usually Elias liked being there. Not tonight. He and Wren rode down together, side by side on the track. The temperature had dropped sharply, and their breath made clouds, and neither of them spoke, but the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that had its own warmth. They tied the horses at the post, walked to the door. Wren ducked through it without breaking stride. Habit, just her life. The room was full, more people than he'd expected, 20, maybe more. The Halversons, the pastor, 3 of the Eastern Valley families, Harlan's 2 ranch hands. The Halverson boys' eldest, about 20, watching from the corner with the avid attention of young men who can smell something happening. And Harlan, standing near the fireplace. Hat in hand, the performance of manners talking to 2 men, Elias recognized but didn't know well. The room noticed them. Of course it did. The particular quiet that spreads from person to person like a wave. Conversations dropping. Heads turning. Harlan turned last. He looked at Elias, then at Wren, then back at Elias. Something moved behind his eyes, not hostility exactly. Calculation, rapid and practiced. "Elias," he said. Warm, as if he'd expected them, as if he'd hoped they'd come. "Good of you to be here." "We heard there was a gathering," Elias said. "There is, absolutely. The more the better." He gestured at the room. "Just neighbors talking." "Just neighbors talking?" "Right." Elias found 2 chairs near the back, and they sat. May materialized from somewhere and placed herself 3 chairs over with the precision of someone who had planned her position in advance. Harlan let things settle. Poured cider for people, made small talk, let the warmth build. He was good at this, the establishment of ease before the real thing, the way a man who knows how to hunt knows about patience. Then he moved to the center of the room. "I'll be direct," Harlan said, which was what people said right before they were indirect. "We're a community. We look after each other. And when situations arise that are a pause chosen out of the ordinary, it's right for a community to discuss it, to make sure everyone is situated appropriately." Murmurs of general agreement, the sound of people who have decided in advance to agree. "Now, Miss Holt is new to the valley." He nodded toward her. "Pleasant, completely pleasant. A capable woman. Anyone can see that. But there's a question of," another pause, fit, of whether an arrangement makes sense for both parties, whether both people are supported as they should be. More murmurs. Elias was watching Harlan's face, and Harlan's face was doing a remarkable thing. It was performing concern, performing it with such commitment that Elias suspected Harlan had convinced himself, that the man genuinely believed he was doing something generous, that the absolute certainty of his own rightness had become indistinguishable from kindness. That was somehow the most infuriating part. He stood up. He hadn't planned to do it yet, but his legs decided before his brain. His legs had been waiting. The room looked at him. He was aware of how he looked. Smaller than almost every man in the room. Lighter. The particular physical fact of himself that had followed him his whole life like a second shadow. 5'4" in a room full of Wyoming ranchers. He was aware of all of it, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he did not flinch from the awareness. He just let it be true. Let it be the whole true thing, all of it at once, without covering any of it. "Harlan," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Not by much, but enough. "Elias." Harlan spread his hands. "I wasn't—" "I know," Elias said. "I know you weren't. That's the thing. You genuinely believe you're helping." He looked around the room. At the faces turned toward him. Some neutral, some curious, some already tilted away the subtle lean of people who have made up their minds. "I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell all of you something. And I'm going to ask you to listen to it the whole way through before you decide what you think of it." Silence. Complete. The fire moved. That was the only sound. "I placed that advertisement in October of last year," he said. 4 winters alone on that mountain. Not because I couldn't manage it. I could manage it. I've been managing it." He paused. "But there's a difference between managing and living. And I had forgotten what living felt like. I'd let myself forget." He looked at his hands, then up. "I wrote that advertisement, and I got one response. One. From a woman in Montana who wrote back about loneliness the way someone writes about a thing they know exactly, who said things in letters that I'd been thinking for 4 years and never said aloud because there was no one to say them to." He stopped, took a breath. The wagon came. She stepped down. He let the moment sit. "And she was not what I expected. She was considerably more than I expected in most respects. A beat. And I stood at that station and felt about half an inch tall. And Harlan said what he said. And half the valley heard it. And I thought—" He stopped again. Let himself feel it exactly as it was in front of 20 people. "I thought he's right. That's what I thought. I thought he's right, and she's going to see it, and this is going to end before it starts." A sound in the room. Not quite a murmur. Something softer. "But here's the thing," Elias said. "Here's the thing I've been learning on that mountain over the last 6 weeks. Strength is not one thing. It is not one shape. It does not come in one size." He looked at Harlan directly. Not with anger, with something much more settled than anger. Ren Holt walked unarmed into 1,800 pounds of frightened animal and walked back out with it following behind her. I watched that, and I felt awe, real awe, the kind you feel when you see something done by someone who has mastered it. He paused. And then immediately I felt afraid, because I'd been taught my whole life that the person next to you being strong meant you were weak, that her capability was an argument against mine. He shook his head. "It's not," he said. "That's a lie. It's a lie I believed for a long time, and I'm done with it." The room was very still. "I wrote a sentence in one of my letters," he said. "I said I believed real partnership meant 2 people making each other stronger, not one person making the other feel smaller." He looked around the room. "I meant it when I wrote it. I didn't entirely know how to live it yet. I'm learning." He looked at Ren. "We're both learning." He sat down. He sat down, and the room was quiet for a long moment, and he could feel his heartbeat in his throat, and his hands on his knees, and 20 pairs of eyes on him. And under all of it, under every nervous physical sensation, something that felt like ground, solid ground, the kind you don't notice until you've been off it for a while. Harlan Pruitt said nothing, not immediately. He stood at the center of the room with his hat in his hands and his carefully arranged expression of concern, and somewhere beneath it, if you looked closely and Elias was looking closely, something that was moving, something recalibrating, the reception of information that didn't fit the existing model. He was not a bad man. Elias had always known that. It would have been easier if he were. Bad men you could write off cleanly. Harlan was something more complicated, a man who had built his whole understanding of value and strength and community around a set of measurements that had never been questioned because he'd always landed on the right side of them. He couldn't imagine what it cost to measure differently. He'd never had to. He was imagining it now, maybe. Elias watched it happen. Then he heard the chair scrape beside him. Wren stood up. He hadn't known she was going to. She hadn't signaled it. She just stood, the way she stood at May's garden, the way she stood between Bull and the fence, with that particular quality of presence that made a room understand without being told that something true was about to be said. "I want to say something," she said. The room waited. She looked around it, not nervously, just taking it in, recording it. "I ran a ranch in Montana for 8 years," she said. "Alone. My father left it to me and I worked it. Every fence, every animal, every hard winter, every decision." She paused. "And there is not a person in this room who would have questioned that if I were a man." Silence. The complete kind. "I am not a man," she said, "and I am not small, and I have spent my entire life in rooms where both of those facts were treated as problems to be solved." She looked at Harlan, not with hostility, with the same directness she used on everything, the same clear gaze she used on wood, on weather, on frightened animals, on difficult truths. "You called this gathering because you think I don't fit, because the shape of me doesn't match the shape of what you expect." A pause. "You're right that I don't fit the shape you're picturing." Her voice was steady. "I am not interested in that shape." A sound in the room, a shifting, the sound of people adjusting. "I came to this valley," Wren continued, "because of a sentence a man wrote in a letter. He said he believed two people could make each other stronger without either one making the other feel smaller." She looked at Elias. "Just briefly. Just enough. I have met very few people who believe that. Truly believe it not just as a pleasant idea, but as something to actually live by." She looked back at the room. "He believes it. I have watched him believe it every day for 6 weeks, including the days it was hard for him to hold on to. And that—" She stopped. "That is rarer than any of you know." She sat down. The room was quiet. May Lund was the first to move. She stood up slowly with the deliberate unhurry of a woman who has made her decision and knows it, and she said simply, "I've known Elias Cord for 12 years, and I will tell you plainly, he is exactly who he says he is." She sat down. One of the Eastern Valley men, a tall, weathered rancher named Gus Stiller, who hadn't said a word all evening, unfolded his arms, nodded once, not to anyone in particular, just to the room. It was enough. It was more than enough. The gathering didn't end dramatically. It didn't need to. The energy went out of it the way energy goes out of things when the thing it was built around has been resolved. People found their cider again. Conversations resumed, different conversations, quieter ones, the kind where people were actually thinking about what had just been said. Harlan Pruitt put his hat on. He walked toward the door. He stopped in front of Elias, stood there for a moment, something working behind his eyes. Then he held out his hand. Elias looked at it, looked at Harlan, shook it. Harlan nodded once, looked briefly at Wren. Something in his face that was not quite an apology and was not quite acknowledgement, but was perhaps the beginning of one, a first draft of one. Then he walked out. Elias looked at his own hand, the hand that had just shaken Harlan Pruitt's. Well, he thought. Well, they rode home in the dark. Stars out. No moon yet. The track lit only by starlight and the particular pale brightness of snow still on the high ridges. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The horse's breath, the creak of saddle leather, the sound of hooves on cold ground. "You didn't tell me you were going to do that," Wren said finally. "I didn't know," he said. "You stood up in front of 20 people and said all of that and you didn't know you were going to." "My legs decided," he said. A pause. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said," she said. He thought about it. "Probably," he agreed. Another long silence. The mountain was rising around them now. The familiar shapes of it, the way the pines changed at elevation, the smell of the air, home, the specific quality of approaching the place that was his, that was theirs. That word still felt strange and true at the same time. Strange and true. Most of the best things were both. "You said we were learning," Wren said. "Yes." "You said we're both learning." "Yes." "In front of 20 people." "I did." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a we," she said. He looked over at her in the starlight. The outline of her, the particular set of her shoulders that he'd learned to read, relaxed now. Open. "Yes," he said, "that's a we." They tied the horses and went inside, and he built the fire up, and she made coffee, and they sat at the table in the way they'd been sitting at the table for 6 weeks now, opposite each other, the candle between them, except it was different, and they both knew it was different, and neither of them needed to say so. He put his hand in his pocket. The ring was there. It had been there every day since the wagon arrived. Moved from the vest pocket to the coat pocket to the vest pocket again, depending on what he was wearing, but always somewhere on his person. Always present. The way a thing is present when you're not ready to use it, but you're not ready to put it down either. He took it out, set it on the table between them. Wren looked at it. She didn't touch it, just looked. "I started that the day after your first letter," he said. "I know I've said that, but I want to say the rest of it." He looked at the ring, the grain of the oak, the warmth of the polish. 3 months of nights by lamplight. "I finished it the week before you arrived, and when you stepped off that wagon I looked at your hands and I thought—" He stopped. Almost laughed. "I thought it's not going to fit. Obviously it's not going to fit. What have I done?" Wren's mouth moved, and then I thought it doesn't matter. The ring is not the thing. The ring is what you make when you're trying to say something you don't have other words for yet. He looked at her. I had been alone for a long time. I had forgotten that I was allowed to try. Wren was very still. "I'm not finished yet," he said. "Being afraid, I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to tell you I stood up in that room tonight and it all resolved. It didn't. I still have the voice." He touched the ring. "The one that does the math." "I know," she said. "I have one too." He looked at her. "What does yours say?" he asked. She considered. "That I'm too much," she said quietly. "That the size of me, all of it, not just the physical, is going to wear someone down eventually. That I'll reach for something and break it just by reaching." She looked at the ring. "I've been careful my whole life. Trying to take up less space. Trying to be less." A pause. "I'm tired of trying to be less." He thought about that. About the hawk on the shelf. About the cot moved 3 feet to the left. About 1,800 pounds of frightened animal and the steady voice that talked at home. "Don't," he said. She looked at him. "Don't be less," he said. I mean this completely. I am not interested in less." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out and picked up the ring. Turned it in her fingers the way she'd turned the hawk on that first evening. Reading the grain. Feeling the surface. That careful, complete attention she brought to things she was deciding to take seriously. She tried it on her ring finger. Stopped at the second knuckle. He watched. She tried the little finger, and it fit. Not quite perfectly, a fraction loose, but it fit. It went all the way on and settled there, and she held her hand up and looked at it in the candlelight. "You carved this in October," she said. "Yes." "For someone you'd never met." "Yes." She looked at him over her raised hand. "And it fits," she said. He looked at it. On her little finger, the oak ring, the 3 months of nights. "Almost," he said. "Almost is enough," she said. "Almost is." She lowered her hand, set the ring on the table between them again. "Almost means you got close by paying attention. That's not a flaw. That's the thing itself." He looked at the ring, then at her. "Wren Holt," he said. She looked at him. "Will you marry me?" he said. "Not because of the letters, not because of the arrangement, because I think—" He stopped, found the real words, the true ones underneath the prepared ones. "Because I think we are in conversation, and I don't want the conversation to end." She was very still, the fire behind him, the candle between them. Then, "Yes," she said, just that. One word. The way she said everything important directly without decoration, with her full weight behind it. "Yes," he breathed. He hadn't entirely known he'd been holding it. She picked up the ring again, turned it once more, put it back on her little finger. "You can resize it," she said. "I know. Or I can learn. You could show me." She looked at her hand. "I want to know how to make a thing like this." "You already do," he said. "You got most of it during the storm. The rest is just practice." She looked at him. "Is that true?" she said. "The shape is already there," he said. "You just remove what doesn't belong." A pause. "You're talking about more than the wood," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the ring on her finger. "So am I," she said. They were married on a Saturday in November. Small. May Lund's front room, because it was warm and it was May's and there was no better reason needed. A pastor. 8 people who wanted to be there without being asked twice. Elias wore his good shirt. Wren wore a dress the color of winter wheat that May had helped her find. It fit her like it had been made for the actual dimensions of the person wearing it, not altered down, not compromised, just made for her. She stood straight. She always stood straight. He looked up at her, and she looked down at him, and neither of them was looking at the height difference, which was why everyone else in the room eventually stopped looking at it too. He'd made 2 rings. The one she'd been wearing on her little finger for 3 weeks, oak, properly resized, now taken in carefully at the workbench with her watching, and then helping, and a new one for him. Pine. She'd made it herself with his guidance over 4 evenings by the fire. It wasn't perfect. It had a slight unevenness on the south side where she'd taken off slightly too much. She'd been annoyed about the unevenness. He'd told her it was the best part. She'd said that was absurd. He'd put it on anyway. It fit perfectly. He held her hand when they made their promises, her large, calloused, capable hand in his. He didn't try to cover it. He just held it, the way you hold something you're not afraid of anymore. Spring came, the way spring comes on Wyoming mountains slowly, then all at once. Snow retreating upslope, creek running full. The aspens budding in that particular yellow-green that lasted about a week before deepening. Birds returning. Everything returning. The specific joy of a season that knew it had been missed. The ranch was different by spring. Not transformed, not dramatic, just better managed. The result of 2 people with different knowledge working the same ground. He knew the land the way a person knows something they have lived with for years, its habits, its needs, its particular moods. She knew cattle and weather and the biology of high-altitude ranching in a way that came from 8 years of full responsibility. Together they knew more than either of them had alone. And that was not a mathematical statement. It was something else. Something that didn't reduce to simple addition. Bull was calmer. Elias thought it might be because Wren talked to him. Not to manage him. Not to assert anything. Just talked. The way she'd talked him out of May's garden on that first morning. Low and steady and unhurried. Like conversation between equals who happened to be different species. He watched her do it one morning from the barn door. She was checking the fence on Bull's south side, and the animal was following her along his fence line, 1,800 pounds of opinion on 4 legs walking alongside her like a dog. He stood there and felt the thing he'd felt that first morning. Awe, not complicated by fear anymore. Just awe, straight, the clean version. She asked him about the peak on a Saturday in May. They were on the porch after breakfast and she was looking up at the ridge behind the property. The high one, the one that rose behind the tree line and caught the last light in the evening. "Have you been up there?" she said. He looked at the peak. "No," he said. She looked at him. "In 6 years on this mountain, I never got around to it." She looked at the peak again. "I want to go up," she said. He thought about it. "It'll take most of the day," he said. "Yes," she said. "It's steep above the tree line." "Yes, I haven't done that kind of elevation in—" "Elias," she said. He stopped. "Do you want to go or not?" she said. He looked at the peak. At the ridge he'd looked at for 6 years from his porch. At the top of his own mountain. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "I'll pack lunch." It took them 4 hours to reach the top. Not because of him, not because of her, because the mountain had its own pace and you learned it or you didn't make it. He was breathing hard above the tree line. She was breathing hard above the tree line. They stopped twice and said nothing in particular and looked out at where they'd come from and then kept going. No performance, no assistance offered or declined, just 2 people climbing the same mountain at the same pace. The top was not dramatic. No sharp peak, no grand gesture, just the place where the ridge leveled out and the ground fell away on every side and suddenly you could see everything. Everything. The valley below, the whole of it. Granger at the far edge barely visible. May's place with the kitchen garden coming back in. The creek line. His property, their property, the barn and the cabin and the pasture and the fence line they'd reset together, and the south pen where Bull stood, looking like a very small problem from this height. All of it. Wren stood beside him. He stood beside her. The wind at this elevation was steady and cold and smelled like stone in the very top of the sky. He did not think about the height difference. He did not think about Harlan Pruitt or the gathering or the voice that did the math or any of it. All of that was far below. Not gone, not pretending it was gone, but small, properly small, in proportion to the actual size of things. He thought about a sentence he'd written by lamplight in October trying to describe something he believed but hadn't lived yet. 2 people making each other stronger. Not one person making the other feel smaller. He'd written it and almost crossed it out and sent it anyway. She'd read it 4 times. And here they were. On top of a mountain he'd lived under for 6 years without climbing. She'd asked him if he wanted to go, and he'd said yes, and she'd packed lunch and they'd gone. That was the whole story of it. That was what the sentence looked like in practice. Not complicated, not dramatic, just yes. And then you go. He looked at the view for a long moment. Then he looked at her. She was looking out at the valley. That strong profile. That careful attention she brought to everything worth looking at. She felt him looking. Turned. Worth it, she said. He looked at her. He looked out at the valley. He looked at his mountain, his whole mountain, all of it finally from above. Yes, he said. She looked back at the view, and she smiled. Not the careful, almost smile. Not the corner of the mouth. The full thing. The real version. The one that changed the whole landscape of her face into something that had stopped trying to be smaller and was just itself. Completely itself. Big and clear and unashamed. He thought, this is the shape inside the wood. This, right here. You spend the time. You pay attention. You remove what doesn't belong. And eventually, not at the beginning, not when you want it, but when the work is done, the shape is there. It was always there. You were just learning to see it. He reached into his pocket. Old habit. Checking for something. His hand came out empty. The ring was at home on the workbench next to the tools she was learning to use, next to the pine ring she'd made with the slight unevenness on the south side that he would wear for the rest of his life. Nothing in his pocket now, and that was fine. That was actually exactly fine, because everything he'd been reaching for when he put his hand in that pocket was standing right beside him on top of a Wyoming mountain in May, looking out at a valley that contained everything they had built and everything they would build. And the wind was cold, and the view was extraordinary, and his legs were tired from the climb, and he was 38 years old and alive on his own mountain in a way he had not been alive in 4 years, and she was there, just there, tall and certain and undiminished. The wind moved across the ridge and the valley spread below them, and neither of them said anything, and there was nothing that needed to be said, and they stood together on top of the mountain for a long time, until the sun began to move, until the shadow of the ridge started to reach toward the property below, until she looked at him and said simply, practically entirely like herself, "We should start down before the light goes." "Yes," he said, and they turned, and they began the way back, together.